Hey, Editing Jeremy here. Before we get started, two things. One, music theory is still something I am trying to learn more about. And if I get anything wrong in this video, do let me know in the comments, but just know that I did try my best to get everything right in here to make my points. Two, same goes for Boards of Canada lore. A lot of this stuff is subjective, it's descriptive, not prescriptive, and so all of this stuff is just my opinion. I don't know if it's true or not. I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer because if there's two groups of nerds that I don't want to piss off, the first is music theory nerds and the second is Boards of Canada nerds. With that said, I hope you enjoy the video. On May 29th, 2026, Scottish electronic duo Boards of Canada released their fifth studio album in 13 years. Inferno. It's a meditation on finding meaning when science and religion both have tried and fail, and it's deep and it's dark and it's cool and alive. As a casual Boards fan, I was nervous on the lead up to this release, as I thought that quitting after tomorrow's harvest apocalyptic tone was quite fitting for the group, and it was hard to imagine how they were going to make something that spoke to the state of the world in 2026, but holy shit, did they. There's probably going to be a lot of videos dissecting the new album's samples and production, but I wanted to try something a little different. I wanted to finally understand what drove the musical feelings behind Boards of Canada tracks. If you're a fan, you know what I'm talking about, even if you don't know the theory behind it. Chords and melodies ooze this weird sort of ineffable nostalgia, at least where they're being nice. Other times the music is weird, dissonant, and unsettling. There's a reason that Boards has multiple tracks in multiple horror movies. Now, I have always associated this musicality that Boards uses with something before making this video that I was calling modality, as in modal jazz. I thought that modal music was when you change between modes or scales that are out of key with each other in the same song. Things like going from a C major triad to an E major or minor triad, but I was wrong. That's not what modal means, and that's not what Boards of Canada are doing. So what are they doing? What leads to this famous, woozy, weird, beautiful, and sometimes scary Boards of Canada sound? Well, that's what this video aims to explain. Let's take a look at the first 9 tracks of Boards of Canada's Inferno and see what makes them tick musically. But really quick, this is not an ad, before we dive into the music itself, there are 4 terms I want you to know that will help us analyze this music. The first one is modal vagueness and chromatic drift. So, Boards rarely uses functional, predictable pop harmony. Instead, their harmony operates on 2 levels. Boards heavily favors the Dorian and Mixolydian modes. These are types of musical scales that can be played starting at any root note, but have a specific number of notes in between notes. And I have made a video on scale modes if you want to pause this and go watch that. It will help you understand what I'm talking about, but you can check the video description for that. These modes have a slightly melancholic, pastoral, or retro-futuristic quality. It intentionally evokes the feeling of 1970s National Film Board of Canada documentaries or old educational television. The second is non-diatonic or chromatic slips. In a lot of their songs, Boards of Canada will suddenly introduce a chord or aspect to the melody that completely breaks the time signature. This creates a sensation of sudden emotional shift, dizziness, or a sort of glitch in the matrix, pulling the listener out of a comfortable tonal center. This can also be referred to as non-diatonic harmony or chromaticism. 3 is the concept of modal mixtures or borrowed chords, which is related to what we just talked about. So remember that modes are scales, like major, minor, Dorian, Phrygian. Each one has its own color and flavor, and Boards use them to convey a mood or emotion. But they almost never just stay in the mode. Instead, they'll mix scales or modes and borrow chords from a parallel key, like pulling a minor key chord into a major key progression to create an uneasy, bittersweet, or sometimes unsettling emotional pivot. Okay, so now we have the framework. Let's jump into the first track, Introit. An introit is a hymn or psalm sung at the beginning of a Christian Eucharist Mass. It is a liturgical opening, and this little 30-second introductory passage is just swirling arpeggios. So it's a single arpeggiated gesture, 10 notes evenly spaced as 16th notes, and the entire opening of the album is this one figure with a little bit of melodic filigree. It's a incomplete palindrome. The figure ascends, C, G, A, D, F sharp, G, and then descends, G, F sharp, D, A, G. The descent mirrors the ascent, but ends on G instead of returning to C, as far as I can tell. So it's an incomplete palindrome, departure without full arrival. The 5 pitch classes can be read as a G major 7th chord, or equivalently as a D9 suspended 4. Both readings are valid, and neither resolves. The harmony is fully suspended, dominant but unresolved, open but tense. Every note is exactly the same, 16th notes, perfectly even, metronomic spacing. Combined with the palindromic shape, it suggests something mechanical or predetermined, sort of a ritual invocation rather than a human gesture. Back to the root ambiguity, D versus G. The implied harmony changes character depending on which note is considered the root. If the root is D, it's a dominant chord that wants to resolve to G. The album would open with a tension-seeking resolution, a question with no answer, which is appropriate. If G is the root, it's a Lydian chord, and the 11th note, the F sharp, gives it this luminous, hovering quality associated with wonder and science fiction. Think like Vangelis or Close Encounters. It does not need to resolve. The album would open in a suspended awe rather than an unresolved tension, which is also very appropriate. Either way, the arpeggio avoids committing to a root, and this ambiguity may be the point. The opening hymn of Inferno refuses to declare a tonal home, setting up an album that will spend 70 minutes in chromatic drift. All right, track 2, Prophecy at 1420 megahertz. So just for fun, let's talk about the title for a second. 1420 megahertz is the frequency of the hydrogen line, the electromagnetic radiation emitted by neutral hydrogen atoms. It's the frequency at which the famous WOW signal was detected by the Big Ear telescope on the 15th of August in 1977, a singular narrowband transmission that many believe could point to extraterrestrial communication. This is Boards of Canada making a comment about science and faith, how extraterrestrial life and our search for it is sort of a way that science searches for God. In fact, the vocoded voice in here, a sample from a lecture by Professor Syed Hossein Nasser, an Islamic scholar, says, "I am God, the ultimate resonance." Resonance in this situation can be a reference to that narrowband transmission of hydrogen atoms. So it's just an interesting bit of lore, and I love how much lore that these Boards of Canada albums have, especially this one. This is their most lore-heavy album that I think they've ever put out. So the most interesting thing about this chord progression is how it starts on C major, which is a very uplifting chord, probably the most basic uplifting chord that exists, and then goes directly to F sharp minor. We'll get back to that in a second, but then it goes to D sharp minor. So going between major and minor chords alone is a very dramatic thing to do, but it goes specifically from C to F sharp. And if you know anything about music at this point, you're probably saying, oh, wow, okay. Because that is called the tritone. It's one of the most dissonant things you can possibly do in music. F sharp is one semitone below G, which is the perfect fifth, the most consonant note that you can play in a chord outside its root, in this case, C. It's also called the devil's interval. So starting off your main track with the devil's interval as your chord progression is a pretty big statement. Another interesting thing going on here is C, D sharp, and F sharp, the three chords, but slightly out of order. This forms an augmented triad, dividing the octave into three exact equal parts every four semitones. This is a symmetrical structure with no tonal center, so maximally ambiguous. Another interesting thing about this track is how it has sort of multiple parts to it, where the beginning can be thought as the religious awe part, the second part can kind of feel like the science part, where we kind of dig into this rhythmic, synth-heavy groove thing. A cool thing that I didn't realize at first listening to this is that the melody itself, that big guitar, every single note there is a perfect fifth. We talked about the perfect fifth before. It is the most consonant note that you can play outside the root in a scale. But because our chords are moving in such bizarre ways, the perfect fifth clusters that they've used here come across as a weird dissonant melody. It's really, really interesting how they are using a combination of the most consonant relationships with the most dissonant chords they possibly could. It gives you this feeling again of an exaltation, a sort of religious experience. It's epic. You're like, wow, but it's all wrong. It's not right. It does not feel right. And that's something you'll see a lot in this album. I think it's really, really brilliant. Track 3. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, leviathan. This is great as a follow-up especially to the previous one because those are the first three elements on the periodic table, the most abundant elements in the universe. And then it's juxtaposed with leviathan, the biblical sea monster that symbolizes chaos and primordial power. Hey, editing Jeremy, I kind of fumbled in this part, so I want to clarify real quick. While helium, hydrogen, and lithium are the lightest and first elements to be created by the Big Bang, as far as I can tell. They may not be the elements that end the universe with, depending on how the universe ends. So this being a beginning of the world, end of the world scenario might not be the right interpretation for this. Instead, what I think might be going on is because Leviathan is actually a primordial serpent, there at the beginning of the world, before the world, I think there might be a comparison here between the three elements that are part of the scientific beginning of the world and a religious element that is part of the religious beginning of the world. But then again, Leviathan is in some eschatological myths, so I'm not really sure. This one's up in the air. Let me know what you think in the comments. So this track sits in B-flat minor, confirmed by the melody, where B-flat is by far the most frequently reoccurring note, and by the chord progression, which spends 60% of the time on the B-flat minor tonic chord, which is the root chord for any key. There are three chords in the cycle: B-flat minor, F minor, and G-flat major, then back to B-flat minor. It's a simple dark loop, the kind of slow harmonic pull that gives the track what reviewers are called its brooding tension and abandoned fairground quality. Also, the chords aren't equally weighted. F minor holds for about 4.5 beats, G flat for about 3.5 beats, and then B flat minor sits there for a full 12 beats. The melody alternates between a couple phrases. Phrase A is most diatonic to B flat minor. It stays close to the scale with one important exception: E natural. That note sits exactly a tritone, half an octave above B flat, and we've talked about the tritone before. We know it is the devil's interval, one of the most dissonant things you can possibly do. Phrase B is more restless, introducing three notes foreign to the key, including a repeating three-note figure B, D, F that outlines a diminished triad, which is an inherently unstable, rootless chord shape. When we talk about things being rootless and unstable, it means we want them to resolve. We have a natural relationship with how these frequencies, which are our notes, relate to each other. And when we hear things that are rootless or unstable, we want them to resolve. So the tritone here, the devil's interval, is a through line. The E natural that appears in both phrases is the single most dissonant note possible against a B-flat tonic. It's the tritone, the interval historically called the devil in music. And it recurs across multiple tracks on Inferno. So the prophecy chord progression, the naraka root motion, and in the little repeating motif in Father and Son. Its presence here in a track named after the building blocks of matter and a biblical chaos monster feels pointed. The tritone is the harmonic equivalent of the leviathan lurking inside the periodic table's border. As we go through the different phrases of this track, it becomes more unstable and more wrong as we introduce more unstable wrong notes. We are moving through the dissolution of matter towards the end of the world where leviathan chaos lives. All right, moving on to Age of Capricorn, track 4. So this is an astrological reference. It's a counterpoint or successor to the Age of Aquarius. And this ties into the album's weaving of spiritual and occult frameworks. We have a couple cool samples in here. Voice 1 is Nostradamus and Our Future by John Hoke, a broadcast of the Art Bell Show, Coast to Coast AM. And the voice discusses the Antichrist and references to Osama bin Laden. Voice 2 is a prayer where he says, "I am a sinner, you bore my sin, you shed your blood for me to cleanse me." And it's a sample from televangelist Jack Van Imp's 1990 videotape, AD 2000, The End. Another eschatological reference, which I think is something that we see a lot in this album, again, where eschatology is the study of the end times, one of my favorite subjects. Finally, we have this really beautiful chant, which I have found, I think, to be a chant by Param Hasana Yogananda. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, but they are an Indian and American Hindu monk, yogi, and guru who founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. And the concept of cults, especially spiritual cults, come out a lot in this album. We have Crowley, we have the Hare Krishnas. So this is the first time I think we get that in this album, and I love how they use that in this track. At the beginning, a computer voice fails to spell the word marvelous, which ties into a magazine's review's observation that the album's voices are entirely dehumanized. Computers either proclaiming "I am God" or failing to spell the word marvelous, or when we listen to Father and Son, how those voices have been so manipulated that they come across almost as like something from a horror movie. At the beginning, we've got these chords that, as I transcribe them, come across more as a drone than a chord. We have held notes, and that kind of makes sense when you think about them connecting to the chant that comes later. We have these fixed notes down at the bottom, A flat and its fifth, E flat, and those stay put while a single voice on top slowly moves down from A flat to G to F to G, stepping down, and then stepping back up. This is the musical equivalent of breathing. And given that this section opens with the Art Bell Nostradamus sample discussing the Antichrist, this drone feels like it evokes a liturgical chant, a single voice shifting over a fixed tonal foundation, like Gregorian plain chant or a harmonium in a temple. Something we'll see a lot in Inferno is there will be different versions of the chord progression that have something to do with the previous. And we see that here where the harmony changes completely once the chant starts to become legible. We move to three major triads, E major, B major, and C sharp major. In a dark album dominated by minor chords and dissonance, this is conspicuously bright, and it really clashes with the I'm a sinner speech in my mind. I think that's such a weird thing to put in with this track that is so uplifting in any other way. There is a borrowed chord in here, and that is C sharp major. That does not belong to any key that E and B naturally share. In E major, C sharp should be minor. Making it major is a harmonic borrowing. It creates a momentary brightening that sounds both hopeful but also slightly wrong. In a track where a voice is desperately affirming faith, this too bright chord mirrors the fervor of belief that overreaches certainty.
You bore my sin.
So, Age of Capricorn again names an astrological age, cosmic cycle. Section A is stasis, timelessness, waiting, a drone with nowhere to go. Section B is arrival, proclamation, clear major chords with a bass foundation. The track moves from the space before an age to the age itself, and faith is given harmonic grounding exactly when it is spoken aloud. And the structural gap between these two sections, no smooth transition, just a cut, suggests that this is not an evolution, but a rupture. Definitely one of my favorite tracks on the album, followed by what everybody else thinks is their favorite track, Father and Son.
I love you, but I love the Lord.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't think this track is a banger, but if you are not getting the horror from this track, I don't know. I think you should get high and listen to it again. This is one of the most terrifying pieces of audio I have heard Boards of Canada ever put out, specifically because of the way they use this ostinato or arpeggio, this repeating figure, which is wonky and weird, in conjunction with these completely dehumanized vocals, which, like, they mangle into weird glottal sounds, and then use spectral resonators to make them sound really, really aggressive and satanic as they're talking to each other. The sample is from a 1971 film called The Jesus Trip, in which a man declares to his father that he loves the Lord more than any physical being. The track actually doesn't have a bass line for its first bit. That comes in later in the track, and you will definitely feel it when it does. Instead, we get this really interesting, almost hocketed arpeggio or ostinato that has the most weird notes that you could possibly put into one of these things. This is pure wonky Boards of Canada. When I say ostinato, I mean a repeating figure that doesn't specifically describe a broken chord, which is an arpeggio. An arpeggio goes like C, E flat, G as discrete notes with different timings, one after another. But an ostinato is a repeating figure that doesn't have to follow the broken chord concept. Overall, it uses 8 pitch classes: C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A sharp, and B. And if you look at those notes together, they are all very dissonant with each other. The ostinato's first half, beats 0 through 7, is centered on F sharp. C sharp is its fifth, A sharp is its major third, making F sharp major the implied harmony. The second half, beats 8 through 14, shifts to G and B territory. G, B, and D outline a G major triad, while F sharp clinging on as a persistent neighbor. These two harmonic centers, F sharp and G, are a semitone apart. Again, very dissonant. These are two keys that should not coexist, forced into the same endlessly repeating cycle, as in a father and son arguing over faith and what's more important, human or the divine. For most of the track, there is no bass line, but when it comes in, C sharp, F sharp, G, B, it's a slow 4-note pattern and super low. The bass line's 4 notes are all already present in the ostinato. It adds no new pitch classes, but only narrows the field. But the way it groups them is revealing. C sharp, F sharp belong to the F sharp harmonic world, and G and B belong to the G, B minor world. The bass literally spells out both poles of the ostinato's divided identity. The F sharp G step in the bass is a raw semitone slide, the sound of slipping between two incompatible realities. And more importantly, nothing resolves. The bass does not ground the track in one key, it reinforces the split. One voice, the ostinato, cycles endlessly between two harmonic worlds, and a second voice, the bass, enters and names both worlds explicitly. The 8-bar phrase gives the track a steady structural pulse, but the two harmonic territories within it never reconcile. Two voices, two keys, one endlessly divided cycle. So I think, connecting it to the title, Father and Son, we have a man torn between love for his father and the love for God. He says,
I love you, but I love the lower more. I love any physical being.
And then we get the most scary but also awesome thing in any part of this album, and that is the voice, uh-huh.
I think that's wonderful.
I've started using this as a vocal stim, just walking around going, uh-huh. So if you ever see me in person and I do that, now you know where it comes from. Editing Jeremy here. I know this video is already going to be kind of long, but I thought this was really cool. And I also thought it was interesting that someone reacted in the way that they did to this. A friend sent me a social media post where someone was trying to be edgy and said that they thought the entire album sounded like the AI plugin from FL Studio. And I was like, well, obviously this is not correct. But at the same time, listening to the vocal processing on Father and Son, I can tell that machine learning algorithms were used in the vocals. I think what they did is like reversed vocals and then ran them through a speech-to-speech thing of some kind, and then re-reversed them, kind of did a bunch of processing to them. And you can hear this throughout the album. They use various dehumanizing effects on the vocals, including AI vocal processing, to make things sound as if they are inhuman. And I think given the nature of the themes in this album, it's a very brilliant and artistic use of this particular type of processing. So I just wanted to put that in there. I think it's really, really cool. Next up is the interlude, Somewhere Right Now in the Future, track 6, a short 2-minute and 26 piece that some journalists are calling the end of Act 1 of the album before we go into Naraka, which represents the beginning of Act 2. The chord progression, C major, E minor, C sharp minor, E flat minor, D minor, and then C minor. This goes back to C major, so we have this minor major modulation on the beginning of each phrase. 5 of the 6 chords here are minor, only C major at the top of each cycle. The progression starts bright and spends most of its time in darkness, then flips back to major on the same root and starts again. The roots cluster tightly around C, all within 3 semitones of home. They radiate outward, 1 semitone down, 1 up, 3 up, 2 up, and then contract back. It's a chromatic breathing pattern that keeps almost arriving somewhere new, but always returns to where it started. And where it started is also how Prophecy at 1420 megahertz started, with that C major chord, which we haven't really spent much time on in these tracks. It's usually this layer of elation that we quickly destroy by going to something that spoils it. Let's talk about something called the Bacardi third. This cycle ends on a C minor and then immediately becomes C major. Only one note changes. E flat becomes E natural. This is the Bacardi third, a device from Renaissance sacred music where a minor key piece ends on a major chord, suggesting divine grace or redemption at the close. Here it happens at every cycle boundary, turning darkness to light at the last possible moment before the whole journey begins again. If you want to talk about cycles here, you could talk about the C minor being death and the C major being life. Another way to look at it is that the album is very, very concerned with cycles. Astrological cycles like the age of Capricorn, or a Yuga cycle, which is a cyclic age in Hindu cosmology. According to the Hindu Yuga cycle, there are 4 cycles that each one lasts for about 4.3 million years. As we progress through each Yuga cycle, humanity's general moral and physical state within each Yuga decreased by 1/4. Near the end of Kali Yuga, this could be represented by going from C major to minor keys immediately, ending on C minor, and then going to C major again. This could represent the eventual cataclysm and reestablishment of Dharma that need to occur to usher in the next cycle's Krita Yuga, prophesized to occur by Kalki. This is what Boards of Canada does to your head, by the way. It is fun, and I enjoy speculating, but it also is important not to get too caught up in it. Next up, we have one of the album's irrefutable bangers, and that is Naraka. Naraka is the word for hell, or the realm of suffering in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions. There's a Hare Krishna chant, which is apparently sampled from a short promotional film showcasing the worldwide activities of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON. Journalists are calling this the opener of Act 2 in the album's narrative structure. The first 2 chords, A flat major and F sharp major, stay constant throughout the entire track. Only the 3rd chord changes across the 3 sections, and each change tells a story. Section A flat major to F sharp major to C major. The move from F sharp to C is a tritone, 6 semitones, the exact halfway point between the octave. In medieval music theory, the tritone was called Diabolus in Musica, the devil in music, because of its unstable dissonant quality. We have talked about this, but I just wanted to get the Diabolus in Musica reference in there because I think it's cool. In a track named after the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain realm of suffering, the devil's interval sits at the heart of the chord cycle. The C major holds for half the cycle, 8 of 16 beats, making it the gravitational center despite being reached by the most destabilizing interval possible. Section B, the tritone softens a bit. We go from A flat major to F sharp major to A major. The change here is something that Boards does a lot in this album, where they'll take the fundamental part of the chord progression and change one thing about it. Here, the change is C major becomes A major. The tritone leap, F sharp to C, is replaced by a minor 3rd, F sharp to A, literally half the distance. This relaxes the harmonic tension, and a new shared note, C sharp, appears between F sharp major and A major, where before F sharp and C shared nothing. The progression becomes slightly more connected, slightly less hostile. Then the chant arrives, and we go A flat major, F sharp major, G sharp minor. This 3rd chord changes again, and this time it's in the track's first and only minor chord. G sharp minor shares 2 notes with the A flat major that opens each cycle, making the transition between them the smoothest in the entire track. And because the G sharp minor and A flat major are built on the same root, the cycle boundary becomes a Picardy 3rd. Again, the Renaissance device where minor turns to major, darkness turns to light. This is the moment that the Hare Krishna chant enters. This is brilliant, and such a subtle small change brings a huge difference in how the track feels. So, the arc here, Section A is all tritones, no shared notes, maximum disconnection. Section B gains a shared note and halves the leap. And Section C gains 2 shared notes and turns the cycle boundary into the smoothest transition on the track. The harmony becomes progressively more connected as the track unfolds, moving from alienation towards unity. This is exactly where the collective human voices enter, the Hare Krishna chanting that BPM called the warmest voices on the record, where collectivity brings focus and there is power in unity. The harmony literally enacts this reading. The music reaches its most connected, most resolved state at the moment that the chant begins. Naraka, as we've said, names a realm of suffering in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist cosmology, but in those traditions, Naraka is not permanent. It's a state you pass through, not a place you stay. The track's harmonic arc mirrors this. It begins in the devil's interval, Section A, passes through softening, Section B, and arrives at a place of cyclical grace in Section C, where darkness and light trade places on every cycle. The Hare Krishna chant, a devotional invocation meant to transcend suffering, enters at the exact point where the music makes transcendence structurally possible. Hell is real, the harmony says, but it's not the end. We're going to skip over Acts of Magic, which is definitely an interlude track, just bristling with a sort of throbbing menace in background recordings, and move to our last track in this analysis, Memory Death. If you've watched Sinister, or if you've watched the new Backrooms movie, you know that Boards of Canada has already been in to horror movies, and some of their music appears in other soundtracks, but if I was to hazard a guess, I think this might be the next track that ends up in a soundtrack. And if it doesn't, it will be the inspiration for music that you hear in a soundtrack at some point. This piece is insanely evocative with only a few choice things that it does. From my transcription, the first chord is an E flat, B flat, and major 7th D. So we're dealing with an E flat major 7th minus the 3rd. Then, nearly 3 octaves above, a lone C sharp enters with this sustained string sound and crescendos throughout the track. And that C sharp is incredibly dissonant when placed against the major 7th of the E flat 7th chord. The major 7th is already one of the most sweetly dissonant things that you can do in a major scale, which is why we generally put it in the chord a 7th above the root note as opposed to right next to it. It's a semitone away from the root of the chord, and it creates an incredible yearning to resolve to the root of the chord. So they've made a chord that already has that sweet, hazy feeling that most major 7th chords have, and then they've stacked on top of it this C sharp, which directly adds another semitone down to that already possibly dissonant 7th that wants to resolve to the root. It's just a really nasty chromatic cluster that, despite the fact that this piece of music has a major 7th chord in it and is generally pretty chill, just gets to you after a while. The second chord is B flat minor, dark but clear, a simple triad with a definite identity. And the third chord is a B major, bright and resolved. The progression moves from ambiguity, sort of a chord that can't really decide what it is, through minor darkness to major clarity. And the harmonic identity becomes progressively more defined, as if a blurred image is kind of coming into focus. While the chords below clarify, that C sharp string that I mentioned above crescendos, getting louder and more insistent as the track goes on. Like I said, against the first chord with the E flat root, the C sharp is a dissonant minor 7th. Against the second chord, B flat minor, it becomes the minor 3rd, suddenly a chord tone, it belongs. And then against the third chord, B major, it becomes the major 2nd or 9th, a bright suspension hovering just above the root. The string never moves, but its harmonic meaning changes 3 times. A stationary note that is first an outsider against the chord that's supposed to make us feel the most comfortable, the major chord, then an insider, then something in between. The chord resolves downward from ambiguity towards clarity. The string swells upward from quiet to loud. These two forces work against each other. Harmonic resolution below, timbral intensity above. And as the music finds its footing, the drone overhead grows more overwhelming. As the picture clarifies, the noise gets louder. This track's harmony enacts the concept of memory death literally. The first chord is like an intact but ambiguous memory. Something is there, but you can't quite identify it. The second chord sharpens into recognizable sadness, and then the third brightens into clarity. But that crescendoing string undermines the entire process. The closer you get to remembering clearly, the louder the static becomes. The memory clarifies, the death encroaches. Our culture called it a limbo state of suspended humanity, complete with spine-chilling ethereal vocals that could suck the breath out of you. That C-sharp string is the breath being pulled away, a single frequency that outlasts and outlives the harmony that it haunts. Hey everybody, Editing Jeremy here. I had cut this part out from the beginning of my video when I was talking about the music theory stuff that we wanted to know, because it was more of a production thing and I never mentioned again. But that was a section about something called hauntology. Hauntology is sort of a concept where things from the past come to haunt us through our media and our culture and our music. And Mark Fisher, who is an amazing author and philosopher, was one of the first people to apply it to music in the mid-2000s, and it 100% applies to Boards of Canada. Their entire catalog is about bringing memories from the past, the feeling of memories, into the future and reframing them in these new ways. And everyone has always called Boards of Canada kind of nostalgic, but that's really what's going on. It's a form of hauntology. And the reason I bring this up now is because a song like Memory Death, I think is really, really interesting for Boards of Canada to create, because it says kind of that, like, look, if memory death were to happen, if there was something like memory death that was widespread, then hauntology would kind of fail to exist. We wouldn't remember anything that could come back and haunt us. And that would almost invalidate all of Boards of Canada's catalog in a way. So memory death as a concept is something to interesting, I think, to think about in the framing of hauntology, which is something that Boards of Canada relies on for how they make you feel with their music. And I think that's my last interjection. Thanks. So here's what gets me about this album. I went into this expecting to find some interesting chord choices, maybe a few odd time signatures, and all the usual Boards of Canada stuff. And yeah, all of that is there. But what I found underneath is something else entirely. Honestly, this album is architecturally insane. Every track I pulled apart had something hiding in it. The introit arpeggio is a palindrome that never completes. Prophecy at 1420 MHz builds its chord progression on an augmented triad, 3 roots equally spaced around the octave, the most tonally rootless structure possible, and then floats a melody on top made entirely of perfect fifths that deliberately clashes with the chords at the midpoint of every phrase. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, leviathan has a single wrong note that functions as the leviathan in the title. Chaos lurking inside the order. Father and Son is 2 keys a semitone apart, sharing 1 arpeggio, and when that bass enters, it doesn't resolve the tension, it just names both sides of the divide. And Naraka, I keep coming back to Naraka, a track named after hell, built entirely from major triads that moves from the Devil's Interval towards a Picardy third over 3 sections, and the Hare Krishna chant enters at the exact structural moment where the harmony becomes its most connected and resolved. The entire evolution of the track is caused by a single note moving by semitones. 1 note. That is it. That's the difference between hell and transcendence. What kills me is how deliberate all of this is. The 7 beat chords on Somewhere Right Now in the Future aren't an accident. The 15-note ostinato on Father and Son alternating between 2 variants to create an 8-bar phrase isn't an accident. The split 7th on Memory Death, the chord that contains both a major 7th and minor 7th, played against that string drone that changes the harmonic meaning 3 times without ever moving, that is not something that happens by chance. Boards of Canada spent 13 years on this album, and I think you can hear every one of those years. Not in the sense that it sounds labored or overwrought, it doesn't. It sounds effortless in the way that only comes from obsessive attention to detail, the kind of effortlessness that takes a decade to achieve. Inferno is 70 minutes of music that rewards every layer of analysis that you throw at it. You can listen to it as a mood piece, and it works. You can listen to it as a political statement, and it works. You can pull apart the MIDI and find tritones and Picardy thirds, arriving at devotional chanting, bass lines that enter the moment a voice speaks of sin, harmonic structures that mirror their track titles with a precision that borders on compositional theology. This might be the best thing they've ever made. And if BPM is right, that it's their last entry in the 5-album Warp deal, then it's one hell of a way to go out. Pun intended. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a really, really fun video to put together. I really hope you enjoyed it. Have you discovered anything cool in this album besides it just being a kick-ass album? Leave a comment, engage with the video, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, share it with people, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.